Yeah, good morning. So, Dr. Lata Dayaram is an associate professor in the Department of Management Studies, IIT Madras. Before joining IIT Madras in 2011, she was serving in IT industry. She holds PhD degree in organizational behavior and masters in industrial organizational psychology from Indian Institute of Technology Madras and University of Mumbai respectively. She holds professional certifications in psychometric assessments, MBTI, FIRO-B, DISC, Belbin, MSCEIT, PAPI, NLP, and is master trainer in leadership development programs such as 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Franklin Covey, International and Crucial Conversations by Vital Smarts, USA. She explores volitional and discretionary phases of work, spontaneous mental states, and goal directed behavior across context, team dynamics, and related constructs in workplace behavior. In collaboration with students, she employs mixed research methods, qualitative measures, large scale organizational survey, and field experiments to study varied phenomena. Today, she will be talking about experimental studies on organizational behavior. We welcome you, ma'am.
Hello, all. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak in this forum, which is CNSL. Though our work and its relevance here would be very different, I think this is the only talk which would be slightly different from rest of the presentations we have heard for last 2 days. And we will not talk about, I will not be talking about any technicalities here on what we do. Some of our, two of our students have already presented on what they do. I'll keep it at a very high level. I'll keep it at a very macro level on what are we looking at from a perspectives angle. So we will also talk about how certain of what you do can complement some of what we do. So I'll keep it at that level and see and take some best practices in both the mutual fields. So I think if that's okay, I'll start off and
Yeah,
let's
please
see
go
how
ahead.
the discussion goes through. All right. So are you able to see that?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So while the
can you please switch to the slide view mode, please?
yeah, I'll do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
So while we emphasize the need for experimental studies in capturing some of the workplace behavior, what we really mean by organizational behavior here means largely from the people's and humans' workplace behavior whenever they get together to work on a particular goal or as such right now we are meeting online, and that's also for a particular goal. So what kind of a behavior we are going to understand and study, and what would be the role of our approach in terms of experiments? Can we do certain of the these meaningful experiments to understand and navigate the behavioral dynamics? So that's our main aim. But I'll also walk through what has already been transpired in these areas. And largely my background is psychology. So we will not, we will be sounding very different from what you have been sounding. We will not talk of neural correlates. We will not talk of structures and anatomies. We will not talk of cells and neurons, but we will keep it at a very behavioral, observable behavioral level. So how do we study behavior, and that too organizational behavior? I'll come to that. So far, how people have been studying behavior. So what could be the science behind human behavior? How people in the past have studied behavior? Okay, and what could be some of the approaches people have adopted. So since our large background would be from a psychological domain, how we have seen behavior. If you see, as the word says, behaviorism, from the works of Watson, Thorndike, Skinner, and all of that, typically learning and conditioning is been the the basis of how a behavior is learned or demonstrated or understood. So other than learning, reward, reinforcement, conditioning, people have also moved on to cognitive, explanations of behavior. Largely, we have perception, attention, working memory, thinking, volition, largely motivational states. I mean, in a layman's terminology, volition and motivational states, or executive functions, and how does that serve most of our behavior, and largely self-regulation, control of these executive functions. How does that correlate with the behavioral outcomes, problem solving, decision making? So cognitive psychology, if you really see, we have been focusing only on the executive functions and correlates of that for the outcomes and the behavior, than really going about. Of course, cognitive neuroscience would have a different flavor, but then purely from a psychology and behavioral understanding, in behavioral sciences, cognitive psychology has been contributing in this manner in terms of executive functions, control, self-control, self-regulation, and the like. And we have, we have also times immemorial, we have been looking at the correlates of physiology and psychology. So it's nothing new, and it's of course obvious to see how does the biological base for behavior can be understood. And there we have of course a lot of traction on how the neural correlates of behavior is looked at. But fortunately or unfortunately, we have more literature on the neural correlates of abnormal behavior or dis-ease, not the typical understanding of disease, but dis-ease or disorder or dysfunctioning or distress or deviance. We have a lot of biological and neural explanations for more of these so-called deviant behaviors, or the spectrum disorders, or any of those things which are largely deviant. But how about the normal day-to-day regular behavior? And there are variations in that. And what we call it as normal and abnormal is just a matter of time, culture, and norms, which keeps changing intergenerational. So we really need to see what is a deviant, what is is it a universal definition of what is deviant, what is normal, what is abnormal, what is dysfunctional. We really have to challenge these and see some of the explanations for that. Then we, of course, we have the developmental science, which is developmental psychology, which been tracking the behavior of childhood behavior to adolescent, to late adulthood, to old age, and other senility and other kind of issues. So we have some traction out there, and we have much more on social psychology, psychosocial factors, where a lot of these theories, say, as yesterday Professor Srinivas was mentioning about Freud's work or Jung's work, these have been talking about not anatomical explanations, but more on the functions and phenomena. And we largely refrain from using the word brain, but we largely use the words like mind, which is a phenomenon, So we directly don't go for explanation directly to the brain and its nerves and cells, but we look at more from a experiential phenomenon angle, and hence the words like mind would appear more often, and behavior which is observable is appearing more often. So there are a lot of theories, and by the way, the entire psychology and its field has been replete with theory development. We are very rich in theory development, and any sound theory, as you all know, has when do you call any theory a sound theory? You have a lot of internal consistency, external consistency, scientific parsimony. generalizability, verification, all of these have been there, but more from the explanations of some of these factors which we discussed than of the neural explanation for any of these. So that's for example, the phenomenon like cognitive dissonance or emotional dissonance. How do you explain if neuroscience has to explain cognitive dissonance? By the way, cognitive dissonance is something which all of us go through every day or every alternate day. So this is not something which is deviant or disorder or dysfunctioning. Okay, so dissonance is something which we all experience cognitively or emotionally, where dissonance is largely, Festinger's work on dissonance largely talks about how beliefs, values, or ideas conflict our own ideas and values. And what we go through, do we go through just stress and arousal, which you see it in your brain spikes? We have not, really not gone into regional activity of brain. What happens when dissonance happens to you? What happens when you go through stress? uh, while that is one way to look at it, we have been more into how do we develop adjustive behavior than maladjustive behavior explanations. So psychosocial factors, psychosocial development from infancy to adulthood, there have been a lot of traction in this field. There are also explanations for behavior from a personality angle, and the debate of nature nurture never ends. Faulty genes or faulty something else, but again, the faulty. And the nurture, which is always environmental, like how behaviorism emphasizes every behavior is just a response to certain stimuli. So, do we look answers inward, in the brain, in the self, in the mind, or do we look answers outside in the environment, depending on the stimulus? So that debate goes on, nature nurture. But there are a lot of explanations for behavior in personality literature. Freud is a popular guy, but then he structured mind and brain as ego, superego, libido, life instinct. A lot of critiquing is there. Allport talks of traits, and Jung talks of types. And Rogers, that's where, if you see from Rogers and Maslow and others onwards, they spoke about so many things which are not structural, anatomical, but more of a phenomena which brain goes through. What do you call that as, if not mind or any other phenomena? You can call anything. But then what does brain go through when it is at work? Not at resting, but at work, at task, as Professor Baparaju was also mentioning. Can we look at the tasks, such as not just a task which is computer aided task or a simple task or a card game, or not those tasks, but then in real life on a day-to-day basis, can we explain dynamic task based neural explanations for behavior? That could also be one area to which would be of very interesting to a lot of scholars in our area. Then you have, of course, the social psychology, how people behave differently in groups, or just leave alone groups, how your own behavior changes if there is nobody around. One more person adds into the environment, behavior changes. Now these are not specific tasks which we are giving it in a controlled environment, but this is a natural environment, environmental stimuli. So that kind of a dynamic environment, how does behavior change? And what are those ways people think, behave, and feel, especially feeling? This is another big confusing word in psychology. From James Lange theories to Cannon-Bard theories, where emphasis on physiological mind doesn't differentiate. The brain doesn't, not mind, brain doesn't differentiate really any emotions that way. Everything is just arousal. It is we who somehow assign meanings and positivity, negativity, valence to emotions, positive emotions, negative emotions. These are all the things which are top up things, but fundamentally just body reacts to various stimuli, and we call it as emotions or arousal, and apply some meaning to it. So we have several Like, for example, things like what Roger said, unconditional positive regard. Uh, where does that appear in the brain? We are really not caring to look at where does that appear, which region of the brain unconditional positive regard happens for when we are dealing with abnormal behavior or deviant behavior or schizophrenics or other maladjusted or slow learners or autism or spectrum disorders. We are really not looking at, because the entire field looks at the functionalism, what works, what is pragmatic, what can we do in the real life scenarios, both for normal and abnormal, because normality and abnormality is again subject to so many conditions and contingency factors. uh, that's all. I mean, so far we have different explanations for behavior. We have very different explanation for behavior depending on which stand we take, which discipline or field we take, starting to explain the behavior. Then we have, I'll come to the actual OB, that is, this is not a discipline, but a field of study in psychology, which is industrial and organizational psychology. And the discipline is industrial and organizational psychology, and the specific field is organization behavior. And it just focuses on, can we capture and can we understand human behavior whenever they are at in a work setup or an organizational setup. And organization doesn't mean formal organizations, or it can be informal organizations. It can be whenever people organize certain activities to achieve certain goal, that's an organization. They're organizing their activities around that. So you can understand organization that way. Then you have, and typically we end up focusing on people, structure, technology, environment. What are all these forces which help explain human behavior at work? And there are different policies and different kinds of mechanisms people have evolved to address and control these forces called people, structure, technology, and environment. So uh, and we look at how does this knowledge we can use, if we know behavior, if we know how to measure behavior. See, anything which can be measured can be controlled or can be managed. So if we have some better understanding of, I'm not talking like James Watson, who says that if behavior is something which is only external, we can control the behavior, we can predict the behavior. Uh, um, so far, we have been successful, at least in psychology, in all the psychology which I have taken you through. We could succeed only to 70 to 80%. So 20 to 30% is still unpredictable. And these are not just English words that the human behavior is unpredictable. Uh, so predictability is something which we all would like to, meaningful predictions, accurate predictions. But when it comes to human behavior, and that too at work in this context, is extremely unpredictable. Like, for example, organizations would like to know, when would you quit? What are your deliberations, and are you contemplating to quit my organization? Because organizations value a lot of loyalty. So when are you, what are those symptoms and what are the diagnosis I can make that you're contemplating to quit my organization? Or, there are, say, several behavior patterns which organizations would like to emphasize on. So, it is largely, and to be able to know whether organizations, employees, what behavior organizations would be interested to know. Uh, this is the answers are not just in psychology alone, but a lot of other interdisciplinary areas. So it's more of a normative applied science than just a pure science. I'm referring to applied science when it comes to OB. Okay, because psychology has also been looked at as a pure science at one point in time. That again, we can debate on that. But if you see the applied science, I'm talking and I'm referring to OB, and it's very humanistic models of explanation of behavior, like how Jung or Rogers or Maslow, uh, they all have emphasized that we all look at growth, we all look at some tapping some potential of ours, and that's also one way to explain why we are here today, to exchange our ideas and present our work and have this dialogue. Somewhere we have an inherent need to grow, to tap our potential and see what we can do. So OB also takes a very humanistic angle that way. And very goal driven, very purpose oriented. Each organization has a purpose, has a business thing to do, and how humans can join their forces and join their potential. And the approaches which we have been taken is typically people say HR. I mean, it's a very misused, abused term, but human resources. We don't really reduce humans to resources, but we see humanistic models see humans more as a capital to invest more than resources to be exploited. So we also take a contingency approach where context-driven, perspective-driven, environment-driven pressures and forces acting on humans. How does that affect their productivity, performance? Finally, organizations want productivity, efficiency, performance. How does that can be explained if we study these resources or capital which we are investing in? And of course, we take a very philosophical and systemic approach to understand at a macro level the human behavior at work. So this has been the background, and you can just say it's just a way to represent this individual is there, and he or she is in a group environment, and that group is is in an organization environment, and this organization is also a part of a larger external environment. Larger environmental factors are influencing constantly this organization, group, and individual in turn. So individual can be seen as a microcosm in this entire thing, or organization can be seen as a microcosm in the society. So how does all these thing we can explain, because these are something which are day to day issues, and how best we can explain this behavior. So of course and that leads to the moment we use these words like individual, group, organization, environmental factors, contingency factors, people say this touches upon the literature of management. How do we manage resources, including human resources? So that's how the flavor has been, because times immemorial we have kings and others who ruled territories, who ruled people. So they must have employed some ways to understand people's psyche, people's behavior, and managed well. So that's how it gets into the IO psychology gets into the field of management. How can work be managed? How can people be managed? How can people who are working can be managed? So of course, Taylor's work on time and motion studies, they have done a very scientific study of trying to understand how work can be best done. Is there a way to do work? Okay, so time motion studies, but that has given a lot of mechanistic view of management. And by 1940s you have a very famous study of Hawthorne study, where humanistic models have started to emerge, and this was in a typical factory setup, which was Western Electric company, where they have done these Hawthorne studies, and popularly we call it as a Hawthorne effect, where people's behavior changed just because they are under observation. So now this is not an external task which we are giving for people to perform. They are doing whatever they have been doing, but somebody is observing and your behavior changes. And if behavior changes, then you can see the neural correlates or anatomical or structural changes which are happening inside the body or brain. So you have Hawthorne studies which have been done, where suddenly the human relations movement started to emerge, and which leads to contemporary organizational behavior. And in the modern science, if you see, Peter Drucker has been the contributor to understand how we can utilize and efficiently utilize various resources and capital for groups and organizations' effectiveness. So these are the contemporary concepts of managing humans and their potential for betterment of society and larger objectives. So in OB specifically, we along with our students have been traditionally focusing on dispositions like personality and performance. How does personality or individual differences affect performance or productivity, or human motivation or volition, perceptions, job attitudes? Typically we call it as attitude problem or ego. What are those things we really do not know? And what are the work attitudes? We use these words like work attitudes, work ethic. What are those, and where does that we really as of now we do not really bother where does this lie in the brain? And emotions, again, emotions is a popular word, but then people use different things. we really struggle to, I mean, psychology has been struggling to differentiate whether cognition comes first or emotions comes first or emotions comes, emotions as a result of cognitive rationalization. We really do not know. We can debate that. And we also focus a lot of studies on job design. That means how work has to be designed so that humans' potential is served better. And of course, much more tricky and murky area is group dynamics, which people fail to understand because it's a very, very dynamic situation out there, conflicts, cooperation, power, politics. Uh, how do we explain these? And of course, those who are expert and scholars in this area, not necessarily they look at, okay, so to understand conflict, cooperation issues in my team or power and politics, which are there in my organization, I should look at the solutions in the brain. They don't think that way. So because real life and business scenarios think differently than finding the solutions only in the brain. Organizational climate and organizational culture, whenever we are coming to work together, how does that define our climate? Is there something which is a defining thing, the climate which is automatically forming in the way we are doing our work? Can we tap that? Can we change it? Is there an emerging structure in the climate and culture of your organization or your team? Okay, what is the climate and culture of your team right now? What is the culture and climate of your organization right now? Are there any structural things there, or are there any other things we can change to the maximum efficiency or effectiveness? So more currently, we have these challenges like globalization, or today, if you see, I would not use the word globalization, but a deglobalization, because history repeats itself. People want to go back to their own local things. So no longer they are talking of global nor local specifically. They are talking of local. So how do we, these are challenges to real-time organizations. Efficiency, productivity, performance, effectiveness continues to be a challenge for all the institutions, groups, units, and individuals. Talent, potential, reskilling. What is this skilling? Where does this skill lies in? Is skilling a behavior? Ask what are these skills and competencies? Where are they in the brain? We really do not know, but somehow it gets manifested in the way people behave or demonstrate. So skilling, reskilling, upskilling, leadership, work-life integration, ethics and governance. So many organizations gone through financial fraudulence and scams and so many things. Where does this ethics lie in the brain? We don't know. Governance mechanisms, administration, management. The need of that is there everywhere to be able to manage the science also. Pure sciences or applied sciences doesn't matter, but somewhere the need for managing this in a systematic manner is felt by everybody. Managing diversity, we are all different, not just the surface level differences like age, gender, race, or the skin color, but also in the way we think and the way we behave. So diversity of that is something which we have to manage in organizations. Technology, again, technology is just not about information technology or typical understanding, but more of how you use it, anything between input and output. So anything you are converting input to output, what are you using and how you can improvise that. We also have gig economy today. Most of you, as this conference is also, I mean, this forum is also happening online, very contract, very temporary. There's no permanent things, fixed assets like people are fixed assets. There is nothing like that. People anywhere, contract workers, contingency labor, so people can be a part of several organizations at the same time. So that's something which is fascinating because I'm not stuck or logged into one organization for lifetime. I can be a part of multiple organizations. And we have things like VUCA, which was initially used in the wartime, but is very relevant even today. How the environment out there is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and which is often there. But people now are talking of things like SMAC. These are jargon. I mean, these are jargon, but there is a. If you really see, there is underlying meaning to all of these. Now they are focusing more on social, mobile, or analytics, cloud. So why are these felt, and where are these felt? Is it because yeah, and today everybody talks of collaborations, social, if you see social collaborations, networking. But how much, just because we're all talking about collaboration, do you think really collaborations are happening? So the rate at which we are thinking about collaboration is higher than the rate at which actual collaborations are happening. So we only talk about it. So boundaryless structures. Today, this forum is also boundaryless structures. People from different parts of the world are contributing. So there is no boundary. There is no structure, clear structures. There is no office buildings today. Wherever you are, you can just. So network organization. These are the things which are there in reality. And how does the human behavior, adjusts, adapts, adopts to all of these things is a dynamic thing. So we need not give several other tasks or other stimuli to see what happens to the brain. You can just pose all of these environmental situations, whatever you are seeing on the slide. All of this would impact humans' behavior, and if it changes human behavior, then we have some evidence to or argument to see what happens in the brain also. So so far we have the kind of methodologies. I mean, I don't think we have a lot of forums who only talk about methods and methodologies and approaches to study the phenomenon which all of us are interested in. People are very keen on presenting what they have done, like through their ideas or what they have been thinking, what they have been doing. But something which, what are those methodologies which all of us can challenge, change, complement each other? So I'll keep it at that level than presenting any one empirical paper of ours. So this, what kind of scientific methods can be applied in studying such kind of phenomena is, as I told, psychology and industrial psychology and other fields of psychology is rich with theories which have been tried and tested, like motivational theories or any of those theories, performance studies. So, but what are those things? There are still complaints of these being very theoretical, and they're still complaining that this doesn't work in reality. While they observe all of these, we can not necessarily say that these theories would apply every time in every situation of the organization. So you can, that means there is a lot of contingency approaches which we still have to take. So most problems have been solved with a lot of biases in the managers' minds and brains, and sometimes no results. They have used tenacity, they have used their own determinism, their own will, their own experience and expertise. Years of experience has given them to use certain problem solving techniques, or hunch and intuition or gut feeling. Now gut again is a structural thing. Authority, they have just sheer use of authority and position, they have influenced the behavior of others. And rarely science, especially to manage humans, to solve their problems. So they do use science to manage people and people resources, just like Hawthorne studies. They intended to do something different, but they got certain other insights out of those experiments at work. So right now, current practice in OB has been the, we typically what we do on a day-to-day basis is we have certain hypotheses in mind, depending on what has been transpired, for 50 years or 60 years of studying human behavior at work. We develop certain hypotheses. We typically follow hypothesis testing. And then we analyze the data. We use a lot of statistical tools because we really can't manipulate much. We didn't manipulate much in the human behavior space, but we collect certain data, observational data, and then we start looking at through various analytical techniques at our desk. But that has a lot of, counterintuitive results also, because we are busy looking at calculating parameter estimates, statistical significance, confidence intervals, type 1, type 2 errors in the data. So all of these things and statistical significance becomes so important for our results and for publishing of our papers. So but really what we achieve, there are so many unanswered questions about human behavior still from the organization standpoint. So what are we doing? This helps to probably, is there some way to look at minimizing of these risks and more confident about our results, not just statistically, but in reality also. So these are some of the methods which we have used in OB. Of course, it was the very oldest naturalistic observation when people are at work, and popularly people have been used a lot of traditional things like interview data, authoritative opinions, because this guy has been there in 100 years in the same industry, so voice of experience, focus group discussions, a lot of content analysis, and case studies. And case studies doesn't mean a case study is just a case history of somebody, but it can be a case history of an organization's performance, or a case in point which can be used with mixed methods in a particular case study. Like for example, somebody is having a burnout at work, can that be a case study for the organization to look at? If more of such a burnout happens and stress happens, a very stressful work environment happens, that can be studied. So largely naturalistic observation was used traditionally, but I must say that today again this method has been picked up, especially under qualitative measures. Again, this has been picked up. Like for example, APA, which we for referencing and for most of our things have been from APA and British Psychological Society and American Psychological Association. They have been, dictating terms on including abnormal behavior like DSM-4, DSM-5, and other classifications. So, other than deviant behavior, we have a lot of instructions coming from how this needs to be looked at. So now there is a lot of takers for qualitative measures like case studies or grounded theory, more inductive ways of doing research than deductive ways of deductive mechanisms. So a lot of inductive ground up, especially after Strauss and Cobbin's work. There are more takers for inductive methods, ground up inductive methods. So, and another very popular one is survey research. A lot of rating scales have been used, a lot of attitude surveys have been flowed. So, self-report measures using various scales, including behaviorally anchored scales, have been used. But these are not, it's a like a daily bread and butter kind of a thing. But then most predominantly what are the fields used is field studies and field experiments, which are more active in OB research than naturalistic observation or survey research or even the laboratory experiments. Mostly you can find the field studies and field experiments. Now, if you see, as I already talked about observation, it has its own advantages in OB research. It does give a lot of practical experiences or a ready anchor to fall back on. Quantitative surveys, of course, in organizations, people have been doing satisfaction surveys in the organization every year, or engagement surveys of their employees every year, because these are large scale, some 10,000 people satisfaction. How do we go about studying? So the sample and other things have been looked at. So quantitative surveys have served some purpose to organizations, but more traction you can see in field studies, where we are doing, we take the data of a predictor variable and criterion variable and from multiple sources, and we using either correlation studies or regression studies. We keep looking at fitment and model fitment and some of these things in the field studies. The data is taken from multiple sources, some from secondary sources, some from primary data. So we do a lot of these things back at desk once we get the data from the field. So field studies have been common, and the field experiments, though limited, have been there. Right now, some of the scholars in OB literature has been looking at, instead of just taking the data and sitting at desk and churning it out through various statistical techniques, we can also do a lot of field experiment where you are able to manipulate something on your own. Let's say compensation or salary packages can be varied, or training can be given to experimental group, and control group can be looked at how, the treatment is not given to them, the manipulation is not done to the control variable. You can see before after models and all of that. So that has been very active in organizational research also. So field studies and field experiments have been predominantly there, and we have been doing a lot of the same thing. Now I'll come to the laboratory experiments. Now this has not served our purpose so far, though it has been there in the pure science of psychology, especially perception, attention, memory, those things people have been using laboratory experiments, but then in the OB research, laboratory experiments have been very, very limited. Largely because of the artificial environment and a simulated environment which doesn't serve our purpose. But I am asking, is there a probability of we getting into laboratory experiment, very controlled experiments, and still serving the purpose? Because a lot of the time, I mean, we are dealing with people, highly intelligent, rational human beings, so called, but all of us are irrational at some other point. So experimental study, I mean, laboratory experiments, controlled environments have really not served OB research, but we can, provided it serves our purpose in some innovative ways. So, I mean, yesterday, two of the students have presented their work on how they are wanting to use a mixed methodology of field studies, field experiment, as well as laboratory experiment, especially when you are doing a task. How does let's say, what kind of a physiological measures can we track other than just the behavior, other than just the performance of the task? So task-based regional activity of the brain, can that inform something on our behavioral outcomes and the performance outcomes? Is also something which a couple of students are wanting to explore, and that's what they presented yesterday. On left side, I have Ramya. On right side, I have Nabila. And they have been looking at employee voice under risky conditions, goal pursuit with the implementation intentions, or not having implementation intentions, is just a random goal pursuit. Okay, because we have so many competing and conflicting goals to accomplish. When do we change the track of our goals? We really do not know. So, role of implementation intentions. Whereas in the Nabila's work, she's looking at how propensity, what is the probability of a person or an employee voicing in a meeting, or voicing in any other risky situation. Do you speak up when authoritarian and expert figures are around, or would you remain silent? And what is the probability of a person voicing their opinions freely? Under those conditions, what happens to your goal pursuit, reward, reinforcement, punishment, or consequences, all of that. So uncertainty and risk and voicing behavior, she's trying to model that with certain field experiments, and now wanting to look at some physiological measures to augment her data and Ramya's data, to see how, especially emotions, like how emotions change the behavior. And what is the data for emotions? So far, we have been only asking people self-report things before, after, and all of that. But self-report asking of emotions, of course, all of you know, has their own issues, reliability and other things. So while they are doing the task, while they are self-reporting, can we also track their some physiological measures to augment and corroborate these statements of theirs with how their body is responding? Because generally we tell lies, but body cannot tell lies. So to that extent, we are trying to look at corroboration of what people tell, behave, vis-a-vis what is their body reacting like. So some final thoughts. My main aim to be present in this kind of a forum is how we can have a complementarity of cross-disciplinary research, and probably having a holistic understanding of the brain and its underlying processes. Now that's the key word for us, underlying processes. And what could be how neuroscience can help us in the methods and the more of the phenomenon and functionalities in real life, other than just the application of it in deviant or disabled or dysfunctional humans. So in how we can complement both the domains, and study of brain, how it must connect much more with reality, and study of the mind, so to say, because again, it's a debatable thing, what is mind, but whatever we understand of the mind. So whatever we make out of the brain, that's what is the phenomenon. So how the study of the brain can relate to study of mind, and so that we can pump in more meaning, more insight, more applicable knowledge to our own lives and well-being. So that's about it. And Thank you so much for this opportunity. We look forward to any meaning if we can see where are the complementarities and where are the mutual wins for both the domains. And thanks for this dialogue and this opportunity. Thank you. Any questions? We are open to questions and feedback and some kind of a mind share. And I think a couple of my students are also logged in. So go ahead.
Any questions, anybody? Okay, Dr. Lata, first of all, I want to really thank you for your talk. The people talk about pointing out elephants in the room, right? That's what you have done. You pointed out many elephants in the room. So this is something that a lot of us are also very concerned about. That is, if you look at physics and engineering, physics forms a foundation for engineering. The two are not disconnected at all. But whereas in neuroscience and if you look at psychology or even the kind of applied psychology that you're talking about, those two seem totally disconnected. Psychiatry doesn't need this foundation of neuroscience, not a whole lot. So why is it like that in neuroscience? So your talk made us, really think about these fundamental problems. Now, I thought of a small thing. So how about having a panel discussion on this? This afternoon, we have a talk by Stefan Bodas, which will be over by 3:30. So from 3:30 to 4,
Okay.
How about having a panel discussion? So
I think
yourself,
that's
Dr.
great.
Bhaviraj and me.
Wonderful.
Because I see that theme recurring in pretty much every slide of yours, right? And there is no simple answer to it. People turn away from that problem, from their obligation.
Very
If
true,
you go
very
to SFN, I mean, there will be some 30,000 posters, whatever, right? And then very little that you can carry over, very little comment on human experience. I find it very weird. So let us have a panel discussion, and if there are no more questions, then we can go on to the posters, right? But let us. This is a big subject. Let us do justice to this and kind of come back, right? Thanks a lot again for both Dr. Lata and Dr. Bhaviraj for agreeing to
Thank you so much.
very quickly to. Thanks a lot.
And also, I think all the students should be prepared to contribute to the panel discussion. It's not just about us.
Yeah.
Right? Think of the bigger picture and how.
Yeah, students must be able to express their voice,
Right.
And come for a big fight, right? And be really open and express yourself.
Right.
Okay. Thanks a lot, and thank you very much. So see you again in the afternoon, and let's move on to the posters.
Right. Thank you. Bye.